Hi, welcome to an introduction to A Course in Miracles. It's a pleasure to have you here with me, and I thought I'd start by giving you a little bit of a introduction to what I first experienced in a philosophy class 25 years ago. That only 10 years later, when the course came into my life, did I know my entire life had been leading up to that moment. My first day of philosophy class, the first time I ever took philosophy, I realized I had some major unanswered questions. At that time in my life, I had not yet begun what you would call a spiritual awakening. I was hovering around the periphery of it, and my philosophy class really set the stage for the rest of my life. Right off the bat, in that first philosophy class, our professor brought up dreams. We all agreed that once in a while we dreamed, and sometimes we remembered them, and we all collectively agreed the dreams were a thing, but they were clearly a mystery. The professor surprised us by saying, "Well, what do you see with when you dream?" And I never heard that question asked, and I never thought about it before. And then upon a little discussion, it became very clear we weren't using our eyes were closed. And so he introduced the idea that there was another part of us that could see. He didn't really stay on the topic much longer. He zipped off to the next one, which was even heavier. He brought up God. And he spent a few minutes talking about the world. And he got us all to agree about the things that exist in the world that were horrible. One by one, we would call them out: war, disease, hatred, violence, murder. And after a little while, we had a list compiled on the blackboard. And at that point, the professor introduced the most profound idea that I'd ever come across. And I knew at that moment it was powerful and important. He proposed that if God was responsible for a world with all of those things that we agreed were in it, that he had to be, pardon my language, an idiot or an asshole. Now, half the class who was already paying attention didn't budge, and half of us sat up at the edge of our seats, wondering where the professor was going, and certainly none of us had heard this idea before. The professor went on to explain that if an all-powerful, all-knowing creator was allowing a world to exist with war and disease and hatred and violence and rape, etc., and he was knowingly letting it happen, well, he had to be an asshole. If he wasn't allowing it to happen and he just didn't create a perfect world, well, then he was an idiot. And I know the terminology is aggressive, but you get the point, and certainly caught our attention. Now, amazingly, the professor didn't dwell on this or offer any other options. He kind of just jolted us to the front of our seats with this idea. I grew up in a Catholic family and had a fairly mild religious upbringing. But at the moment that those words were said, I realized this was an idea that needed to be thought about. I was immediately aware that this wasn't an idea that I'd never heard before, that was discussed certainly in my religious upbringing. Now, as I said, the professor didn't stay on the topic. He immediately went on to the next topic. And this was discussing philosophies of life. And indeed, he gave us a homework assignment after spending some time discussing what philosophies of life were, some of the famous philosophers and their proposals for what philosophies of life could be. And so our homework assignment was to go home and to write our own philosophy of life. And this was without a doubt the most excited I'd ever been to do homework in my entire life. That night, as I sat down to do the homework, I had a very quick and almost immediate idea about what my philosophy of life would be. It was going to be to not have the philosophy of life. I thought that I didn't want to be pigeonholed into one specific thought system or way to operate, and that it would be better to have my options open. I was less than 2 paragraphs into writing this paper when I stopped, sat up, and started chuckling to myself when I realized to not have a philosophy of life was a philosophy of life. And at that point, I was so intellectually stimulated from the day's class and from my desire to do the homework and from the realization that I recognized I don't have a philosophy of life, and I really wanted to have one. And indeed, I needed to have one. At that time in my life, I was kind of doing a mix of school and partying, kind of just floundering around and didn't have any clear direction. And this really put into my mind the concept of what I already knew to be true. I didn't have a real direction. So I thought for a few minutes, and again, fairly quickly, I looked back and I realized this was pretty inspired. I got the idea to have a philosophy of life of living life righteously. I went on to write the paper, and I put forward that we have inside of us sort of a guiding system. We have what would be called our conscience guiding us to do the right things, and we have what could be called the devil on your shoulder, the voice tempting you to lie, to cheat, to steal. And so I was very satisfied with that paper. I felt inspired, I felt stimulated, I felt that this was a philosophy of life that everyone could live, but most importantly, that I could live. And at that time, certainly, I was not living my life righteously. I was aware, though, that I was having every moment, every day, choice. I had the opportunity to choose what was best for me or to choose the other side. And that I indeed had a guidance system within myself, offering the information on which way to go. Now, it took many, many more years for me to align myself with that philosophy of life. But to my surprise, when I discovered A Course in Miracles, through the book I will talk about in a little bit called The Disappearance of the Universe, I immediately knew that my entire life had led up to that moment. For within the disappearance of the universe, and indeed within the foundational thought system of A Course in Miracles, not only are all of those ideas brought up, and not only were they brought up immediately to me in one day, they were answered. And so this set me off on the most incredible journey and adventure that's led me to you, to Sedona, to the love of my life, to an entire life devoted to the path of A Course in Miracles. So I'm going to spend the next little bit of time talking to you about what the Course is and what it isn't, and describing a little about the thought system that it contains, what it looks like doing the Course, and a little bit more information that hopefully you can find interesting, informative, and overall my goal is to simply just explain what A Course in Miracles is. Jesus states in the Course that the goal is happiness and peace. Part of the reason I'm able to sit in front of you right now is after walking the path of the Course and completing it and continuing to study it and begin to teach it, is I have a level of happiness and peace that I did not have my entire life, that I indeed did not know was available. And so I'm joyfully being here representing with Team Miracles the idea that you too can have a radical shift onto a path of happiness and peace that has truly become the most exciting adventure of my life. Now, Jesus was channeled, if you will, or scribing the Course through a woman named Helen Schuckman. She was a psychotherapist in New York City in the 70s, and there's a lot of information available about how the Course came through her. And indeed, in the introduction and the preface of the Course, Helen herself talks a little bit about it. I'm not going to spend too much time on it here, but please know that there's a lot of information about Helen, her partner Bill, who assisted her, and the process of the interdictation, which is in itself a wonderful and beautiful story. It's not lost on me the funniness of Helen being a Jewish atheist who had nothing to do in any way with spiritual enlightenment, but was firmly, deeply rooted in traditional academia in a very high profile job in the middle of New York City. Lastly, it's important to know that the Course is a complete self-study system, which is totally free and available without having to pay anything for it. Most of us students and teachers will have the physical books, and those can be purchased from a couple different publishers, but it's important to know that there is free content online, a free process of going through the entire course online, and tons of free content all over the internet about the Course. However, the Course is designed initially as a self-study system, so you don't need anyone else. You don't need a teacher. Everything is contained within the Course itself. Many people study the Course many different ways, and there isn't one right or wrong way to do it, by yourself, in a group, with your partner, etc. In part one, I'm also going to review what makes up the Course. The Course has 6 parts. The first part is the preface. The preface contains 3 sections from Helen and Jesus as an introduction. Where the Course came from, how it came about, what it says, what it's for, all contained wonderfully and beautifully in the preface. Then we go on to the text of the Course. There's an incredible introduction, which I will go over in a little bit. And then we have approximately 30 chapters of information that Jesus is asking us to study and review and digest over the course of completing the lessons of A Course in Miracles. The lessons are contained in the workbook. There are 365 lessons. Following the workbook, we have the Manual for Teachers. The Manual for Teachers is chock full of wonderful information about moving forward after completing the course, answering the call, and becoming a teacher of God. The Manual for Teachers also has a clarification of terms of some important ideas that Jesus is really redirecting us towards from what we've been taught about. We also have in the additional content of A Course in Miracles, a pamphlet for psychotherapy, and we also have the Song of Prayer. The pamphlet for psychotherapy is about the application of the principles and thought system of A Course in Miracles in psychotherapy. And as I mentioned, Helen herself was a psychotherapist. And so Jesus brings forward a very relevant section for not only her, but for that field of science. And then lastly, we have the Song of Prayer. The Song of Prayer is a beautiful additional part of A Course in Miracles. It contains a very dynamic and important teaching, and really also a redirection of about prayer. What is prayer for? How can we evolve it from the current state we use it, if we use it at all? And where can we take it as we walk a path of enlightenment? Most importantly for me is also in the Song of Prayer, Jesus teaching us about the true forgiveness of Course in Miracles. And indeed, this is a path of forgiveness, but in no way the forgiveness that we are talking about through religious systems and social systems, but a radical, beautiful, unconditional forgiveness that sets the tone for walking the path offered by Jesus in A Course in Miracles. Part 2 is a quick section about what A Course in Miracles is not. A Course in Miracles is not a cult, and it's not a religion. As I said before, it's also important to restate, A Course in Miracles is totally free. You do not have to pay anything to walk the path of A Course in Miracles. Part 3 is about completing A Course in Miracles. You complete A Course in Miracles by doing all 365 lessons. It is specifically stated to not do more than one lesson in a day. You can take as much time as you like to do one lesson. You can repeat lessons, but fundamentally it's about completing all 365 lessons in the workbook. Jesus is also guiding us to read and study the text along with doing the lessons. Those are the only rules. Read the text and study it, complete all the lessons, and don't do more than one in a day. Some people will try to do the course in 365 days, but that is not necessary at all. Indeed, if it takes you years to complete A Course in Miracles, and for many of us it does take years and many starts and stops. For myself, I started and stopped the course 5 times over 17 years. Each time going a little bit farther, and each time restarting at the beginning when I began it again. In 2020, Rachel, my fiance, and I started the course for the second time together. First, we would read a few pages of the text each day and doing a workbook lesson each day. Sometimes we stayed with the lesson for a couple days. Sometimes she was away from town or I was away and we took a day off. Sometimes we were together and we just took a day off. We did it in a fun and gentle but serious way, and with only a few guidelines or requirements or rules, it was very easy for us to flow and support each other as we move through the workbook. The text of the course is beautifully written. It is not an easy read at first, but the most important thing to remember is this is a gentle process which shouldn't induce any stress. And so just reading the text without necessarily having to absorb everything your first time through it is perfectly fine. And indeed, if you're reading a few pages a day, you can probably very easily go through the text at least twice throughout your journey with the lessons in the workbook. Now, the requirement of reading the text along with doing the lessons is addressed by Jesus in the introduction to the workbook. And I'd like to read that quote to you. Jesus tells us, "A theoretical foundation, such as the text provides, is necessary as a framework to make the exercises in the workbook meaningful. Yet it is doing the exercises that will make the goal of the course possible. Now remember, the goal of the course, specifically stated, is happiness and peace. In part 4, I want to go through the introduction to A Course in Miracles, which is at the beginning of the text. The introduction is as follows. This is a course in miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you ought to take at a given time. The course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. This course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Now, when I first read those words in the introduction, when I first bought the course, the enthusiasm and excitement I cannot even describe. I was so intrigued, and hopefully some of you are watching this for your first time and hearing those words are as well. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about this introduction and some of the ideas it contains as a part of explaining it. And so the course says, as you just heard, this is a required course. Well, what does that mean? Jesus is bringing forth for us in A Course in Miracles a curriculum that establishes who we are, what we're doing here, why we're here, how we got here, and why, and even where we are going. And so the course is required because that information is required. Jesus is very clear that the Course in Miracles is not the only way. It is one of many, many paths available to us on our awakening and enlightening. The path is required because it is willed, and we will learn this. God has willed us back onto this path. And so it is just a matter of time or lifetimes that we answer the call that Jesus is representing and that A Course in Miracles is representing. It's not required that you do A Course in Miracles. It is a matter of fact that at some point you will choose to answer the call to go on a spiritual adventure, to awaken, evolve your consciousness, and become enlightened. What does it mean that the opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite? This is a very foundational and beautiful idea in the thought system that Jesus is teaching us. He's teaching us that love is all there is. Many of us have heard this idea sung in songs and poetry, talked about, and indeed Jesus is bringing forward that in reality, love is all there is. We will talk a little more about this when we go into the teaching section of A Course. But it's important to recognize that Jesus is making a very clear distinction. Fear is not real, and love is. So if love is all there is, there can be nothing else. What does it mean that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists? This is what I like to call one of the infinite truths of existence that Jesus is teaching us. This is the way things really are. And it's a beautiful, beautiful truth. We are learning through A Course in Miracles that we are invulnerable, perfect, immortal, eternal beings of love, having an experience that is not real. And so therefore, the truth of us cannot be hurt, cannot die, cannot in any way have something lasting and permanent negatively affect us. The peace of that is a part of what we uncover and dwell in as we study the text, as we do the workbook lessons, as we follow the guidance of Jesus, remembering that the state of happiness and peace is what the object of the course is and what it's offering. Part 5 of this introduction is about what Jesus teaches us in the course. I'm going to share some of what is at the core of the metaphysics and the unified non-dualistic thought system. First and most importantly, Jesus is teaching us that God does exist. The name you use for God is not important. Jesus uses God, but you could use source, all that is, he, she, it, whatever feels good to you. And indeed, Jesus is bringing the course to us and using many traditional Christian terms, and he's totally redefining those. But it's important to know that it isn't relevant what words you use for those concepts and ideas. So the base of the course, as I explained, is not a religion, and it's not connected to any religion. But there are terminologies and names Jesus uses specifically to redirect them in our minds so that we can be aligned with what he thinks about and what he knows to be true. So God exists. The next fundamental teaching that Jesus gives us, and one of the most radical compared to the thought systems, philosophies, and sciences and religions on the planet, is that God did not create the universe. God is perfect love, Jesus teaches us. And God resides in a vibration of perfect oneness, perfect love, and perfect peace, which Jesus calls heaven. Jesus teaches us that God is not here in this illusion. Jesus describes the experience that we're having here within the universe as a dream, as an illusion, as something that is not real. It is hinted at in the introduction and then reinforced in many different ways with theory, logic, and truth throughout the text and lessons of the course. Now you can imagine my surprise when this came about 10 years later, approximately after taking that philosophy class. Immediately when I understood this, I saw how that was being planted into the back of my mind in that philosophy class. The asshole or idiot theory. Jesus was giving the truth and the answer that wasn't available to me, indeed to most on the planet at this time. The radical idea that God does exist, but did not create the universe. Jesus teaches us that God is perfect love, and he creates only perfect love. And so therefore anything, including this universe and our experience, is not real. Jesus teaches us that the universe itself is an illusion. It's an illusion in the mind of God's creation, named Christ. Our path is to wake back up to heaven, to reality, and to the Christ self that we really are, the dreamer of this dream. We've gotten ourselves sort of stuck here in the illusion. Jesus goes deeply into that, but the foundational idea is that we think we've separated from God. And now with God not being in the illusion, he is calling us to wake up. Jesus teaches us that we are spiritual beings and not human beings. We're spiritual beings that have stepped into a separation experience in this human form. As eternal spiritual beings, Jesus is teaching us, as I alluded to earlier, our truth is that we are forever protected. We are forever loved, forever safe, and forever innocent. And most importantly, we are forever together with God in heaven. The path here through A Course in Miracles is to awaken back to heaven by retraining our mind using the non-dualistic thought system that Jesus is teaching us. And in that non-dualistic thought system is unconditional forgiveness, true forgiveness, and love. Jesus is asking us in the Course to teach only love, for that is what we are. He's guiding us back to truth, which we've gotten so far away from as we've seemingly become stuck in a cycle of separation in the universe of murder, death, pain, war, etc. Now, to be sure, there's wonderful things here as well, but nothing lasts. Everything dies. This is a world and a universe of death. And so we can recognize, once Jesus is explaining us the foundational ideas about God, that it makes perfect sense that God would never create a world like this. Indeed, many atheists and many religious questioners and skeptics all cling to this very basic concept that if God was good and loved us, why do babies die? Why is there disease? Why are people who do evil things come out ahead? Why do the people who do good things come out at the bottom? It's an unfair, clearly unbalanced, imperfect world. And so the exciting news is that God does exist and is not responsible for this. And Jesus is teaching us that we are all responsible, but not in a negative way. There is no problem. We, with our free will, have chosen to have this experience. God's not mad. God doesn't care. He has created us as free will, powerful creator beings. And He's allowing us the best case scenario to make a mistake by creating a universe of fear and death, and then allowing us to learn and wake up from it. God's not forcing anything on us. He's not waiting to judge us. He's perfectly loving us. And indeed, we haven't left heaven. Jesus is teaching us that we are still there, having this dream, this illusion. And through A Course in Miracles, He is calling us to awaken back to where we want to be. One of the concepts in the dreaming mind of Christ, or our true selves, is that we've seemed to split ourselves off by thinking we've done something wrong, by creating fear. Fear doesn't exist in perfect love, as we read in the text, or the introduction of the text. What is all encompassing can have no opposite. But here we seem to be living in a world of opposites. Fear seems to be very real here. And we can understand through the Course that we are responsible because we think there's something wrong. And we've gone deep, deep, deep away from dealing with that fear. And so we've gone very far away from the truth of who we are. And we're being called back to that lovingly and gently. One of the metaphors that I think is really wonderful in understanding this and getting a kind of wrapping our heads around it, and I know this is a lot for an introduction, but I think it's important to really kind of get a sense of what this is all about. The metaphor that's really beautiful is the idea of a child in bed having a nightmare and the parents coming into the room. And so when the parents enter the room, they can see their child maybe thropping about, maybe kicking, maybe screaming. Clearly, they can recognize immediately my child's having a nightmare. Now, the parents can't go into the nightmare. They can just watch and see that it's happening. And very most likely, the parents are not going to rush to the child's bed and shake them and say, "You're having a nightmare, wake up, wake up." They're going to gently soothe the child. Maybe the mother goes to the child's bed, puts her hands, starts to whisper. The father's watching. And this is a wonderful metaphor for what's happening with us. And this is an introduction to the idea of the Holy Spirit. God the Father is standing in the doorway watching us, His children, have a nightmare. He can't go into the nightmare. He can only watch as it unfolds, the way a parent can do with a child. But what God has done is He's created the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is God's voice, calling us to wake. Jesus tells us that He, over His lifetime, became enlightened by only listening to that voice, the voice of the Holy Spirit. So the voice for God, or the Holy Spirit, is the part of our awakening that has been given to us by God to wake when we are ready, on our own time. What we learn from the Course in our pursuit of the goal of happiness and peace is that we really do want to wake, that we really aren't fundamentally happy here. And it's very likely on some level, if you've come across this video and you're listening to these words, that you can resonate with an experience that there's something wrong here. I'm not totally happy here. Things don't seem to be working out. This isn't a fair world. And we never have given the proper answers of why that is so. Jesus teaches us also in the Course, and the name of the Course obviously is a Course in Miracles, that miracles are natural. That when miracles aren't happening, something has gone wrong. Jesus brings to us the truth that He learned and then lived in his lifetime, which allowed him to perform miracles. Remember, he told us that we are all equals, and what he can do, we will do. And through the Course in Miracles, we are raising our consciousness to a level back to what is natural. And in that natural state, the miracles flow. It's important to remember that the purpose of the Course is not to attain the level of miracles. The purpose of the Course is happiness and peace along our goal of awakening. However, a really exciting part is that along that path of awakening, while we're attaining the happiness and peace, we're going to get access to a natural ability that we have pushed way deep into the subconscious parts of our minds, and that is the miracle. The most exciting part for me as I conclude this section is remembering when I first discovered the Course, and I saw that all the ideas from my philosophy class came back crashing into my consciousness. For years, I hadn't thought about them at all. And as I said, and you most likely can see for yourselves, that the idea of God creating the world or not creating the world isn't an option for us available to even think about. So in that first day, as I started to devour the disappearance of the universe, which I'll mention a little more in a moment, I recognized that the Course contained all three of those ideas from my philosophy class. The idea that this world was a dream, an illusion that we had to wake up for. The idea that God was not responsible for all of these horrible things on the planet, but indeed did exist. And also, and maybe most importantly for me at the time, was that I saw my philosophy of life that I had written about was indeed what the Course was guiding us towards. That we were being asked and guided to live life righteously by listening to the Holy Spirit, by answering what was within us, telling us what was best for us. Now, lastly, as I conclude this section, I want to mention the ego. Jesus spends a lot of time in the text allowing us to understand the thought system that we've been using while we seem to be having this separation experience from God. The foundation of that separation experience is the ego, which we've made. And Jesus teaches us as a device we're using to continue and perpetuate this experience. The ego is not an enemy or an entity. It quite literally could be looked at as a toy that we've just used to play in this experience. But we've become so used to playing it, and we've designed it in a way that's at its foundation is fear, that we've been kind of stuck in a loop using this toy of fear to keep us afraid from awakening. And so on the path of studying and completing the Course, we learn about the options we have. We can choose an elusive, unreal, meaningless thought system of fear, which we've been doing unconsciously. Or we can choose truth, the thought system of love, the thought system offered by the Holy Spirit, which Jesus embraced fully, embodied, and allowed him to become enlightened. That's a little bit of a lot of what's incorporated into the Course in Miracles. But I hope it gives you an idea of some of the radically different, exciting, powerful, and certainly for me, very interesting truths that I had no idea were out there and available to study, to learn, to embrace. Part 6 is an introduction to a basic but very exciting aspect of A Course in Miracles. It's that it is not just a belief system. You are not just asked to believe what the Course is telling you. Like so many other thought systems and religions on the planet right now, Jesus is offering us a path of direct experience. We have to start with belief or just maybe non-belief at all. But where we get led to through A Course in Miracles, and the reason I am here, confident and happy and joyfully able to talk about this, is because I have gotten the experiences. Jesus teaches us that the path towards the abilities to connect with our natural state of miracles is that we get a growing conviction. Indeed, a sense of conviction is necessary. Now, we don't have that at the beginning of studying A Course in Miracles. It's not possible because we're learning a radical and majorly different system of thought, way of living, and understanding about ourselves and what we really are. So the Course is teaching us through the text and workbook, but it's also teaching us externally by the experiences that we have. Some of these can be ginormous and some of these can be simple, but they are sure to come. Rachel and I call these course confirmations. Many of you may be familiar with the idea of synchronicities, but this is one of the most joyful aspects of A Course in Miracles for me, is that by doing the work, by studying the text, by practicing the lessons, you have experiences that confirm that this is indeed true for you, that this is indeed the way things really are. And this for sure is a major aspect of our ability to attain the happiness and peace the Course is offering. This is a part of the exciting spiritual adventure that the Course is giving you. You don't just have to believe. You get to a beginning of a conviction and then to a knowing. There are a few things that I now know that I didn't know before. And it's enough for me to be sure that A Course in Miracles is what it says it is. Now, that's not for you to believe me, but the opportunity is available for free for you to walk this path and to get the experiences that will confirm for you that this is indeed the way things are. Now, Jesus addresses this beautifully, and I want to read a quote from this section. In chapter 9, part 5, paragraph 9, line 1 of A Course in Miracles, in the text, Jesus says, "This course offers a very direct and a very simple learning situation, and provides the guide who tells you what to do. If you do it, you will see that it works. Its results are more convincing than its words. They will convince you that the words are true." Even talking about it now and reading this to you, I have this buzzing of joy because I've done it and I know it. And I'm so excited that if one of you who has not done the course or even heard about it gets an opportunity to walk this path, to choose to answer this call, these experiences are waiting for you. And they're the most wonderful and the most beautiful. And it's so exciting for me that Jesus is meeting us in a place where he knows it's not good enough to just believe. He knows we need to have these experiences, and they are available. When we're convinced, we know something, it's proven to us. We don't have to doubt, we don't have to believe. And that's why I'm here giving this class, it's because I am convinced of a few amazing things that are wonderful and exciting that I had no idea were available to me. And so that is another reason why, if you're here, I highly suggest, and what Team Miracles here in Sedona is really, really supporting, is dipping your toe into the water of A Course in Miracles. In part 7, I just want to take a small moment to talk about my path and what it looked like and how I came to discovering the Course. In my 20s, after that philosophy class I mentioned, I sort of slowly but surely had different types of information coming my way. Looking back, I realized that my mind was being opened and more expanded. And so over the course of a number of years, I read and studied about alternative archaeology, conspiracies, UFOs, sacred geometry, psychic phenomena, and much more. In the spiritual systems that I studied, never once was the idea that God did not create the universe come up. And I never even thought about it. It seems though that looking back, there was this missing piece that kept me going forward and looking for more. And so I discovered A Course in Miracles through the book The Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard. It is a book that I highly recommend if you have any interest in getting into the Course and reading first. It is not necessary. It is not a part of studying and completing A Course in Miracles. But Gary Renard is a longtime teacher of the Course, and he had an amazing experience that introduced him to the Course. And so in his book, The Disappearance of the Universe, you get a thorough and in-depth understanding of all that it is that the Course offers, and some really fun ways to process that information through the conversation form that Gary has with his teachers, two ascended masters. Gary Renard is a longtime teacher of the Course now, and as I mentioned, it is my recommendation to my students and to you to read that book first, but it is not necessary at all. There is additionally tons of content and teachers of the Course in Miracles available, and we'll have a link below to Rachel and my recommendations for what we tell our students that we think is a good supplemental way to totally involve yourself in the lifestyle of your spiritual mind training given to you by Jesus in A Course in Miracles. It's important to remember that the course itself is self contained and does not need any supplements for you to walk the path. But we find it very helpful along this journey for us and for our students to get as much as you can throughout your entire day of all that is available that resonates with you in the course information, the course content, and from course teachers that we think do a wonderful job of increasing the joy and the happiness and the peace in this awakening path. I'm going to conclude this introduction to A Course in Miracles, and I want to thank you for following it through all the way to this moment. It is truly an honor and a joy to be a part of Team Miracles, producing this content and reaching out to you to introduce you to A Course in Miracles. You can come to Sedona, you can visit us, you can reach out through sedonamiraclecenter.org and see what is available to you through the content and all the activities. Or you can dive into the disappearance of the universe, or you can go ahead and just dip your toes straight into A Course in Miracles. We at Team Miracles are here to represent the joy, the happiness, and the peace that is offered by this path. We're here to thoroughly recommend it, to remind you that it's totally free, that it is available to you wherever you are on the planet, and it is an incredible, exciting journey. And as I finish, I'd like to read you one more quote from the Course. All that must be recognized, however, is that birth was not the beginning and death is not the end. Yet even this much is not required of the beginner. He need merely accept the idea that what he knows is not necessarily all there is to learn. His journey has begun.